I finished a whole book on project management last week. I spent hours on it. I highlighted pages, I made notes. Today, my boss asked me for one key idea from it in a meeting, just one, and I had nothing. My mind was completely blank. It was embarrassing. It feels like the information just disappears. Why does that even happen?
Perhaps the problem isn't your memory. The problem might be how you define learning in the first place.
What do you mean? I read the book. I understood it while I was reading. Isn't that learning?
It feels like it. That's the difficult part. We believe that consuming information is the same as acquiring knowledge. But reading is passive. Understanding an author's clear explanation is not the same as having that understanding yourself.
So reading is a waste of time?
Not at all. It's the starting point, but it's only the first step. Most people stop there. They confuse the feeling of familiarity with true competence.
Familiarity. Yes, that's the word. I recognized the ideas in the book, but I couldn't recall them. I couldn't use them.
Exactly. True learning begins when you stop consuming and start creating, or more simply, when you start trying to explain.
Explain it? To who?
Let's try it. What was one of the big ideas in that project management book? Pick one, even when you feel you don't remember well.
Okay, there was a whole chapter on scope creep. It seemed important.
Good. Now imagine you have to explain scope creep to a 10-year-old, not to a colleague, not to a manager, to a child. What would you say?
To a 10-year-old? Okay. I would say scope creep is when the project's requirements expand beyond their initial objectives. It leads to uncontrolled growth and puts the timeline at risk.
Would a 10-year-old understand requirements, expand, initial objectives, or timeline at risk?
No, probably not. I'm just using the words from the book.
And that is the core of the problem. You're retrieving the language, not the idea. The complexity of the words hides the gaps in your own understanding.
It hides the gaps? I thought using the right words meant I understood it.
It's a very common belief, but often the opposite is true. When you are forced to use simple words, you can't hide. You have to understand the fundamental idea. If you can't explain it simply, you don't really understand it.
Okay, let me try again. For a child, scope creep is when you agree to do one thing, but then people keep adding more and more little things to it.
Better. That's much closer. Can you give the child an example, an analogy?
An example, like you agree to build a small castle out of sand, and then your friend says, "Can you add a tower?" And you do. Then another friend says, "We need a wall around it." And then another says, "What about a river around the wall?"
And what happens to your original plan to build a small castle?
It's not a small castle anymore. It's huge. It takes all day. And the first parts I build are starting to fall down because I didn't plan for them to hold up a big wall and a tower.
Now look at what just happened. Your first explanation was full of professional jargon. Your second one, the one with the sandcastle, was clear, simple, and actually more accurate. Which one required deeper thinking?
The sandcastle. I had to create a story. I couldn't just repeat words from a page. I actually feel like I understand it better now, just from that.
This is the second step. The first was to try and explain. The second is to notice where you struggle.
I struggled with the jargon. I couldn't find simple words at first.
That struggle is not a sign of failure. This is what most people get wrong. They feel stupid when they get stuck, so they stop. But that moment you get stuck is a gift. It's a diagnostic tool. It's a bright flashing light that shows you the exact edge of your knowledge.
So when my mind went blank in the meeting, that wasn't a memory problem?
It was an indicator. It showed you where your understanding was weak. Instead of feeling bad about it, you can see it as useful information. It allows you to pinpoint the exact gap.
So the goal isn't to have a perfect explanation on the first try.
The goal of the first try is to find the imperfections, to find the sandcastle parts that don't make sense. You found you were relying on words like initial objectives. That was your gap.
So what do I do when I find a gap? Just think harder?
No, you go back to your material, but you don't reread the entire chapter. You go back with a specific question, a mission. Your mission is, how does the book explain the difference between initial objectives and later additions in a way I can translate into my sandcastle story? You read for an answer, not just for completion.
So I identify a concept. I try to explain it in very simple terms, like to a child. I try to distill its most important parts. As I do that, I pay close attention to where I struggle. This helps me pinpoint the gaps in my knowledge. I go back to the source material to fill only those gaps. I repeat this until my explanation is smooth, simple, and clear. I have to distill the information.
Most people believe learning is a straight line. Read the book from start to finish. But real learning is a loop, a cycle of explaining, failing, and refining.
That makes sense, but it still feels unrealistic. This sounds incredibly slow. I have to get through entire books, learn complex software, understand market trends. If I do this for every single concept, I'll never finish anything. Smart, busy people don't have time to create children's stories for every idea they learn, do they?
It's a fair question. It feels slower at the start, but is it truly slow if the result is knowledge that actually lasts? What is faster, reading a book in 5 hours and retaining nothing, or spending 7 hours on it and retaining the core ideas for years?
When you put it like that.
The people who seem to learn quickly aren't just faster readers. They have a better process for converting information into knowledge. They do this loop intuitively. They read something and they think, how would I explain this to my team? How would I describe this to a client? They are constantly trying to simplify and translate.
So it's a habit, a mental process they're always running.
Yes, and it creates a chain of understanding. When you truly understand one fundamental idea, the next one is easier to connect to it. Your knowledge becomes a network, not just a list of facts.
A network. So learning about scope creep this way helps me learn about project budget later?
Of course, because you can now connect the budget to the sandcastle. What happens to our budget for shovels and buckets when we suddenly need to build a river? The ideas link together. Your explanation becomes more coherent. When your knowledge is coherent, you don't need to memorize as much. You can recreate the details from the main ideas because they just make sense. It's like building a strong skeleton first, then the rest has a place to attach. Before, I was just collecting bones and hoping they would assemble themselves. That is a perfect analogy, and a skeleton built this way is strong. The knowledge you gain is not fragile, it is robust. It can withstand questions, it can be used in a meeting. It doesn't disappear under pressure because you own it. You didn't just borrow it from the author. So let me see if I can summarize the whole system, the whole loop. First, I choose a fundamental concept I want to learn. Then I try to explain it in very simple terms, like to a child. I try to distill its most important parts. As I do that, I pay close attention to where I struggle. This helps me pinpoint the gaps in my knowledge. I go back to the source material to fill only those gaps. I repeat this until my explanation is smooth, logical, and coherent. And the result of that process is a real understanding, a robust knowledge I can actually use. What do you think? Does that sound like a system that could have helped you in that meeting?
It's not just about the meeting. It changes how I think about picking up a book in the first place. I always thought learning was about adding information, like pouring water into a container. But this feels different. It's more like building something, piece by piece. And the gaps, they aren't failures anymore. They don't feel frustrating. They're just the next place to build.